take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
Show of hands. Except you two. Who knew Brockville had a museum? Not I, as you both rocket your hands up. Peggy, Brooke, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for coming in. For people who are new to the podcast, thanks to this and wanted to hear more about the museum, I've had a few people come on and talk about museums before. We've had Laura, we've had Emma. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of museums and what they do and what they represent to communities and culture and history. And, you know, I learn something new every day that small towns actually do have museums.
Exactly.
We do.
Yeah.
Right into the microphone. That's okay. So you're having like a new exhibit.
Yes.
Prudence Howard.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why Prudence? Why is this woman deserving of
I'll let you take that.
a full exhibition here?
So Prudence Howard was born in 1896 in Montreal to a fairly wealthy family, but they had a summer home in Brockville. So her connection to Brockville is quite strong. Her family history, her grandparents lived there, and then her parents bought the family cottage. So Brockville was super important to her, and we wanted to bring together the paintings that she did in Brockville to bring all the paintings back home.
Right. So everything that's going to be featured was like done in Brockville.
Done in Brockville or of Brockville. Yeah.
Got you. Okay. Fun fact: I was born in Brockville.
Super cool.
1992. Shout out to the doctors and nurses. Don't know any of you, but you brought in me. So great. So can I be in the museum?
Sure. We do have like a People of Brockville exhibit.
Yeah.
So famous people of Brockville. I guess you would count.
Yeah.
You were born there.
What's the criteria now here to be famous? Okay. So I can't remember. Did we already mention the date? So she was like very early 19th century.
Yeah. So she was born in 1896. Unfortunately, she died in 1947. So she was quite young when she passed away. She suffered from asthma her entire life. So that really affected her health, and healthcare for asthma wasn't as great then as it might be today. So she died quite young. She had a very like traumatic childhood. Her dad and two of her sisters died both when she was 16 years old. So lost 3 family members in 1 year. Her 2 brothers fought in the First World War. So had kind of a rough childhood, I guess, but they're from a fairly wealthy Montreal family. So she wasn't as bad off as some of like her contemporaries in art, I guess.
Right. So, like, I mean, how did this affect her art? Like, was it, I don't know if you know the answer, was like just like a talent and a hobby that she's like, oh, I'm pretty good at it? Or like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, a lot of times when you hear art, it's from, like, good art is like, not all the time, but like struggle. Like persevering
I
through
wouldn't
some
necessarily
things.
say that in her case. Like, she started taking lessons at the Art Institute of Montreal or Art Association of Montreal, when she was 12. And she took them all the way up until the start of the First World War, when she went with her mother and her sister over to England to be closer to her 2 brothers that were fighting. And when she was there, she like went to art exhibits in London and stuff like that. When she came back to Canada after the First World War, she took more lessons at the Art Institute of Montreal, which is where she met a lot of her friends and contemporaries, which became the Beaver Hall Group.
Who's that? Yeah.
The Beaver Hall Group was a Montreal group of artists from 1920 to 1922, and they were kind of like the Montreal rival to the Group of 7, which a lot of people know who the Group of 7
right,
is.
but for those who don't know, Group of 7.
Right,
we always have to provide. We always have to provide context.
So the Group of 7 were a group of male artists that were mostly based out of Ontario, Toronto area, who, if you've ever gone into a gallery or picked up a mug that has art on it that you'd say, this is Canada, 9 times out of 10, it's painted by one of the members of the Group of 7. Some of their names would be Lauren Harris, A.Y. Jackson, Tom Thompson, the really big Canadian art names.
Okay.
Yeah, so Prudence was at the Art Association of Montreal, where she met a lot of these other artists that formed the Beaver Hall Group. So it had 19 members. 8 of the 19 members were women, which was really big in that day because Group of 7 was all men. This group was almost 50-50 men and women, which was super important because a lot of women artists at the time, once they got married, they stopped being artists. marriage became their full-time job.
And even then, you have on top of that women artists were not considered professionals. They were seen as a hobbyist. So by having a professional group of women coming together like this to produce art, they are propping each other up and giving their art legitimacy.
Right. Like, well, is that maybe a reason they never took off, like, the group of 7? Like, did people maybe, like, look down on them because it was women
possible.
And people didn't take it seriously, like, outside of, like, the circle they were in?
Yeah. Well, the Beaver Hall group only lasted for 2 years, where the group of 7, I think, was together for about 10 years before they disbanded.
Right,
so
right.
there was also more exposure, and because they were all men, there was more exposure. But, like, A.Y. Jackson was the first president of the Beaver Hall group, and he was very well known in Toronto as a member of the group of 7. He was the first president of the Beaver Hall group. He really supported these young artists, because he was a little bit older than they were. So he supported trying to get their art off the ground. And in this exhibit that we're opening at the Brockville Museum, Painting Picnic with Prudence Howard, we do have some A.Y. Jackson pieces coming, because he used to go to Brockville, to Fernbank, where her cottage was, and would go paint with her. So that's why it's painting picnics. He kind of coined that term, that they would go and do this together.
Right. Does someone live in that cottage now? Or, like, is it still a thing, or is it, like, now part of, like, the museum?
No, it's still in the Heward family, which is really special.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So, like, moving forward in her life, like, I know people can't see some of the art that she produced, but
Yeah.
As I was looking through, there was obviously a lot of, like, scenic kind of things.
Yeah.
Also, I do not know the correct terminology
Yeah,
for
yeah.
this. Like,
Okay.
I am, like, art illiterate. Like, I know nothing.
Well, like, we're not
0%.
art historians either.
This has been a crash course for everyone at the museum. We're all historians, really. We're
Right.
not
We're not
gallery
art
trained,
historians.
so everything we have is self-taught, but we've all been very excited to try to learn these new things and try to understand the terminology when we come up
Right,
against
okay,
it. So
okay.
Yeah.
don't worry.
So Prudence was very well known for her portraits, or I think she called them
Figure
She called
studies.
them figure studies. But she was very well known for doing portraits of women, especially young girls and young boys in her life. Like, there's one of her caddy at the Brockville Golf Club. I don't remember
One of
where
her
it's on
brother.
display. There's one of her brother. There's some of, like, her nieces, some of young girls that she met traveling between Montreal and Brockville. Sorry. So it's really cool that this exhibit is about her landscapes and the scenes that she saw on these painting picnics in the Brockville area. We have a painting of Gananoque. We have a painting of Maitland, Cardinal, Athens, scenes of the St. Lawrence River. So it's really neat that this is the first time paintings of Brockville have been brought together of hers.
Right. Have the chance to, like, look at the pictures and then, like, go to the spot where maybe you could, like, look out and be like, this is what...
There's a few. There's some of, like, local churches and stuff where you're like, okay, this church is on this road. We can go see that place.
Right.
There's others. This one's just called, like, Summer Landscape near Brockville. And you're like, this is along the St. Lawrence River.
Okay, right.
I don't know where it is.
There's been a lot of Google Map sleuthing, trying to figure out where roads are and where buildings are and curves in the road or whatever are, and asking each other, do you recognize it? Is it here? Is it there? And sometimes we're able to narrow it down to a section, maybe.
Right.
But there's some that, hey, maybe that's something we'll do with the exhibit. We'll put a little suggestion box out saying, do you know where these pieces of art were
Right.
painted? Let us know the location.
Right. Because I'm like a huge music guy, and when I hear a song and I look at the lyrics and I'm like, I try to put myself in the headspace. Like,
Yeah.
I know sometimes songs like come out and you're just like, wow, I feel this. But, like, where was this person at when they were writing this? Why is it so dark, or why is it so this? So I have to think, like, it's very much the same as, like a
Seeing a painting
or
something?
a
Yeah.
painter or like
Yeah.
an artist, like a visual artist like that, where, like, you're like taking a walk and you kind of just look and you're like, I mean, now it'd be on
Yeah.
Instagram probably, but before
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
like, I need my canvas.
Yeah.
Well, it's really neat. My boss and I got to go to the archives at Queen's University, and they have the Isabel McLaughlin collection. So she was also a contemporary artist at the time. And they have almost all the letters that Prudence Howard ever sent to Isabel McLaughlin, because she kept everything. So we got to read, like, in Prudence Howard's words, how she was feeling one July day in Brockville. And she said, like, it's too green and too hot outside to paint right now. So come visit and bring your tennis shoes or something like that. So, like, you can tell it was her passion and and a hobby and a job for her, but also, like, okay, like, I can just take the day off because it's too green and it's too hot outside to paint today.
Right.
There's also record of her saying, or not even her saying, but her friends who were artists saying that she always doubted her art. She was a shy person. She didn't want to teach or anything like that. So she was always comfortable doing smaller canvases and didn't look for the accolades that some of the other professional artists that needed their art to sell to survive would have done. And also because, unfortunately, because of her health and because she died so young, a lot of her contemporaries went and painted for another 20 years, whereas her dying at 51, unfortunately, means her body of work is significantly smaller than, say, A.Y. Jackson, who was alive, I think, up until the 70s.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it's a small body of work, but it's a very interesting body of work.
Well, what was her fame then, like, at the time? Was she, again, like, through your research and what was her notoriety there? Like, was it very small, like Montreal kind of knew her, or was like she like kind of recognized a little bit more?
Yeah, she was all over the place. Yeah. Because of her close like relationship with A.Y. Jackson, she in the 1930s she joined the Canadian Group of Painters, and she was its first vice president or something like that, I think. So, like, we have a timeline of all of the exhibitions she was in, and she was probably in 3 exhibitions a year. Across Ontario, Quebec, she exhibited in London, England, throughout the States. Some of her shows were or art pieces went to like Buenos Aires on exhibit. So she was kind of all over the place. But because of her, I would say it's probably because of her relationship with A.Y. Jackson. And he was like, I have all of these art friends that want to be on exhibit too. So we're all going to do a show and you're going to look at all of our artwork together. Because he was like the big name, I think, that people would have looked towards.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the big names. I would say that she would have been known in the art world, but probably her fame, at least in Brockville, would have come from the family. Just being from a very well-known, well-established loyalist family in Brockville is why people would have known her.
What was art like in the time? So, like, I'm trying to, looking back at my high school history education, the 1920s, roaring 20s, the economy's booming a little bit. It's, World War I's over. The Great Depression hasn't happened yet. So, it's a very robust time. What was art's impact, and more specifically in Canada? Because you almost never hear about that type of stuff.
It is an interesting time for art in Canada in the early 20th century. It's kind of a part where a lot of artists are trying to establish the Canadian art scene. They want art that's distinctly Canadian, that you can look at and go, this is a Canadian artist. This isn't from America. This isn't from England or whatever. So they're experimenting with different styles, different colors. They're trying to create a national identity for art. And that's something that the Group of Seven really becomes well known for. They really become known as those Canadian artists. And that's what the Canadian Group of Painters goes on to become. And they're taking kind of what's happening in the era and being influenced by things like music. So you get in some of Prudence's paintings and her friends from the Beaver Hall group, you see them really exploring modernism and jazz and Art Deco in their pieces. But you also see the critics at the time really hating the art because it's going against everything that is considered good art. They're using very interesting colors. You could almost call them garish colors. I know there's one quote somewhere about some of the art at the time that's essentially calling it a hot mess, and it looks like a stew that was thrown on a canvas. But
are these Canadian art critics, or are these
are
like
Canadian art critics out of Toronto, kind of idea, out of Montreal?
Yeah, Toronto hasn't changed.
It takes a while for Canadian art really to get its place, but it's people like Prudence that help establish Canadian art as a force to be reckoned with later on.
Well, and it's neat because I have a quote here that Prudence said in 1942. She said, I think that all the arts in Canada, painting shows more vitality and has a stronger Canadian feeling. There is more interest shown in finger painting than previously, and I hope we shall develop something interesting and Canadian in feeling, yet universal, modern, yet timeless. So, like, she she was classically trained in Montreal. She also studied in Paris. She studied in Italy.
With a lot of the big names.
With a lot of the big names at the time. So it wasn't like she's like, I'm just going to paint today. She was classically trained and she knew what to do.
Okay, right. So, yeah, she wasn't just like, for lack of better words, a rich girl who just was painting and like got all these opportunities.
She studied. She trained.
Okay. I noticed also in her work, other than when we talked about the scenic stuff, but I noticed a lot of pictures of women, and specifically like some women from much different cultural backgrounds that I would say, than what we would expect, and especially that time, the young First Nations girl, like some black women. Yeah. Like, what was that all about? Why does that draw her attention?
So some of them I know she did. She traveled to Bermuda with Isabel McLaughlin. So I know some of them come from her travels there. Others was she kind of had the influence, I guess, to be able to do it.
It would partially be influence, but it'd also be time frame of. It's easier for her to get a young woman to sit that she can paint than it would be for her to do a one-on-one with a young man that she doesn't necessarily know. Because you're still looking at those decorum kind of old fashion social values, and they're from a rich family, so those values are holding strong. So she's able to go into, some of them were farmers' wives, some of them are friends, some of them may be servants, and she's able to paint them. And she also says somewhere that she knows women. She is a woman. She knows how to paint women, and she's not interested in romanticizing them. So when you look at her art, they always have an expression. They always have an expression on their face of almost, can you hurry up and finish this? Or of defiance, or of, I'm sitting here, but I'm not going to smile. She's not trying to make them look pretty. She's not trying to make them seem attractive. It's very much, this is what a woman is like. This is normal. This is. There's one very famous painting of hers that I think is in the gallery here in Ottawa, and it's a young farm woman, and she has her hands on her hips, and she's just staring down Prudence, since it's her painting, and it doesn't make you feel comfortable necessarily looking at these pieces of art. Yeah. You're really kind of looking into the soul of these people. Interesting.
Was that something like capturing the soul of it? Like, that takes a lot of, I don't know, skill or humanity in what you're trying to do, right? That like, that like you can't even do that in like a picture today sometimes, that you're really capturing the essence almost.
Yeah. It's
was that even recognized at the time? Like, when I'm thinking about, like, women weren't regarded at all, like, really back then, right? Like you said, like, they all would become mothers and wives, and that became the rest of your life.
Yeah.
When she was painting pictures of women, like, again, like, going back to the time, like, was that even of interest, or like, did people still regard that as like,
it was,
wow.
But it was like, it could be controversial at times. So in 1929, she won the first prize at the Willingdon Arts Competition for Girl on a Hill. And it was a work depicting a modern dancer, Louise Maclay. I think that's how you say her name. So I have here, it was a triumph for an unknown artist, especially since the painting used dark, unexplored colors. Dennis Reed wrote in his book, A Concise History of Canadian Painting, that Girl on a Hill displays more than a passing acquaintance with the subtle colors and classical compositions so dear to Parisian taste that during the early years of the century. So, like, the critics did come after her sometimes, but they also appreciated what she was able to do with her portraits.
Interesting. So it was recognized.
Yeah.
That she could pull that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Though for some of her career, she's also going against the grain, because it's a time where people kind of wanted landscapes, and she's doing these unromantic portraits of people.
Like, not something you really want to put in your house or sell, right? Like,
no. Yeah. Now she's pretty collectible.
Yeah. I want to know, like, so how many people work at the Brockville Museum with you?
So we are a very small staff. Yeah. We are a community museum. With the exception of our intern here, Brooke, we are 3.5 staff.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, for those who don't know, like, you walk into a museum and you're like, wow, this exhibit's great. And then you go home and you're like, that's great. when we look at like, the Museum of Nature or of the Science and Tech, right? You have a lot of people.
You have teams of people
doing different projects
that do things, and we have one person. Like you'll have a team of educational programmers where we have Peggy, and you might have a team of curators where we have our boss Natalie.
So I'm interested, like if you can, like the best you can, like take us through the process of,
of this exhibit.
We're like, okay, so we're like Cole's Notes, or if you want, we could talk for 3 hours. It's all good. But okay, so we want to do an exhibit on Prudence. I keep screwing it. I want to say Hayward. Hayward. What does that look like? Take us through that process of setting up this exhibit.
Well, I can talk a little bit about the beginnings, I guess. So the Beaver Hall group celebrated an anniversary in this year. This year's the 100th anniversary of the Beaver Hall group starting, 2020. So I know the group at the museum, this is before I came in, wanted to celebrate it, and they had heard that Prudence Howard was from Brockville and all this stuff. So I think it was a couple years ago even that...
Victor was talking to someone. Victor's one of our colleagues. He was talking to, I guess it would have been one of Prudence's nephews, and somehow found out about this connection, and then it didn't really go anywhere for a couple of years. And then we just kind of kept finding more and more information about Prudence and her time in Brockville and about her art. And then our boss Natalie got in contact with a lady called Evelyn Walters, who is kind of a Prudence Howard aficionado. She's written quite a few books. She knows a lot about her. And we ended up just finding out more. We found out people who have paintings. We got in contact with the family. And once we got in contact with the family, and that would have been last August, I believe, maybe a little before that, we started seeing, you know what, we have an exhibit here. If we can somehow pull this off, because as we keep saying, we're punching above our weight class here. We're a small little museum who just doesn't know how to stop.
Yeah. So when you say we kept finding out or we kept looking for, again, I want to like take people, like really show the process of how things like this come together.
Yeah.
What do you like?
So even,
I assume you don't have this giant like encyclopedia at the basement where you can just be like, I'm just going to look up everything I need. Like how,
no.
You know what I mean? Like when you say finding out, what are the things you're trying to do? You mentioned you visit the Queen's archives.
Yeah. So I started at the museum in November. I'm there on a YCW, which is Young Canada Works Heritage Organization grant.
That's a really long acronym.
It's a long name. So YCW. So I'm there only for 5 months. So I started in November, and my last day is the day the museum opens to the public, or the exhibit opens to the public, which is super sad for me because this is now my little baby, and I have to leave.
Right.
So when I had started, the museum had been in contact with other museums and galleries to get certain pieces of artwork to Brockville that they knew were completed by Prudence Howard in Brockville or by friends of hers in Brockville.
And how receptive are like the National Art Gallery? Are they like really like supportive? Like, are they just like, why is this little museum?
The process is kind of like, hey, we're doing this exhibit on Prudence Howard. We know that you have this piece of art. Can you loan it to us for a few months? That's kind of how it goes. And then
there might be stipulations on the loan.
Yeah, loan agreements go back and forth.
Right,
and
like you guys don't have like a Slack channel of everyone in museums being like, hey, did anyone know where this painting
There
is?
isn't a group chat or anything like that, no.
Okay, right. So you got to do the research to find who has them. And
so my job when I came in was to get in touch with these different galleries and private collectors and be like, hey, is it still okay if we borrow your art? And when I first started, I think there was 10 pieces of artwork that we were going to have. It might have even been 8. Now we're at 16 pieces of art that's going to be in this exhibit, which we're like, okay, there's still enough space on the wall that we can fit everything, but it's getting tight, which is cool. So we started out with Prudence Howard pieces and a piece by Ruth Elliott. And the Elliots were the neighbors of the Howards in Brockville. And we decided we could get some A.Y. Jackson pieces. So we have 3 A.Y. Jackson pieces that are going to be on display, which is super exciting. And then even in the last 3 weeks, we've had 2 people contact us, be like, we also have this painting if you want it. We're like, yes, we do want it because it's going to add to our exhibit.
Yeah, so it's not all art just done by Prudence. It's art from this whole group that we're participating in the painting picnics. So we're trying to really... we're not an art gallery. We're not trying to say we're an art gallery. We're looking at this through history. So we're looking at it as this group of people coming to Brockville, depicting Brockville in the early 1900s in these painting picnics. So definitely a different look.
Yeah. And so now that, or once we discovered we could get all of these paintings to Brockville, we had to figure out how we were going to pay to get them to Brockville.
Right.
Because shipping fine art is expensive.
Yeah.
And like half of the budget that was decided for this exhibit is going to shipping our work to and from Brockville.
Wow.
Which is, it's a big expense, a necessary expense, because these are priceless works
But
of
those
art.
are the things you don't think about. Like,
No, like we had a fundraising campaign. We had a fundraising gala that we're going to be having at the end of the month. We were asking for sponsorships from local businesses and stuff that would help us out, and we've had a really great response. I think we're somewhere like 80 or 90% of the way to the goal that we wanted to reach.
Wow.
For sponsorship, which is awesome. And a lot of it's cold letters sent out to businesses. Will you help us out? Members of the community, people who are members of the museum itself have helped us out. So it's been a really nice community effort, and a lot of people in the Brockville community are very excited that all of this artwork is coming home to Brockville.
Wow. Yeah, because you'd think, today we have phones like that do everything, like Netflix on demand, like all these different things. I've had this conversation a number of times on the podcast, but when we're talking about art, and when I say that, like visual, music, all that stuff, like, right, like when you're thinking of educational cuts, like that's usually one of the first things to go in society when arts start getting, right, like, and it's been going on like that everywhere for all of time. The first thing to go is art, music, all that type of stuff. So to me, that a community would still rally around, not some woman, but disrespectful, but a woman alive 100 years ago who's painting, like that. You guys didn't have too much trouble around that. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, we've been very, very lucky that we've been able to find the support just from the average person walking into the museum, to the art community in Brockville, to some of the private donors that are also lending art, things like that. Everyone's been very, very excited about this. And I think part of it is people of Brockville, speaking as someone not from Brockville, but people of Brockville are very, very proud of their hometown. And they want to show, the bigger communities of, we're right between Kingston and Ottawa. So they want to show that we have everything that Kingston and Ottawa does. It's just on a small town scale, really.
Right.
So it's like, we've had big artists. We've had very well-known artists that have come out of Brockville, and they painted these wonderful pieces of art. So why shouldn't we support it? And when it comes to things like cuts, yes, you're definitely correct. We've been very lucky at the Brockville Museum because we are also, I don't know how to put it, but we're also supported by the city of Brockville because we are a city department. So we're different from a lot of community museums where we don't have to fundraise 100% of our budget. We do get some money, but we still do rely on donations to keep things going, to keep things like our education programs going, and to keep special events like this happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like when you think about people, how do I put it? People who are very concerned where their tax dollars are going, that they might find out, I don't know much about the demographics of Brockville and what the industry's like there, but I assume, just like most of the parts around the city of Ottawa, it's a very conservative base, that the municipality can still find room in the budget. And again, the community rallies behind it because they see, the importance that this plays in their community. Like, it's just, to me, that's fascinating because you don't get that a lot anywhere anymore. That like that proud of our history, and we want to showcase that. Like, it's different. It's a different perspective.
Yeah, so we do get money through various grants as well. Like I said, we get money from the city, which we're very lucky for.
Don't worry, I'm not doing an audit on you.
Oh no! All of a sudden,
yeah. Where does okay? Go right through the verticals.
Did you spend?
Yeah, no. I just find it interesting that the community can rally
it is
like
interesting, and we do get money through what's called a CMOG grant, which is Community Museums Operating Grant. So that's something that helps keep the lights on, essentially. But we've also undertaken, I'd say for the last about 6 years, a huge educational component where we are trying to educate the community on the importance of our museum. Educating them that this is where we keep the history of Brockville. This is where we have that history of the industries that have come and gone, of the people who are here. And we're trying to show that we are for the community. We support the community. We try to display the community to any sort of visitor to Brockville. Mm-hmm. And I think people are starting to really engage with that sort of messaging. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, it's nice that we talk about how nice it is, but, give me some education about it. Why is a community museum like this, why is that so important, like, today, when you have Wikipedia, when you have Google? What is it about the community museum aspect that really is super important to like a local town?
So one of the really cool things that I found out when I got to the Brockville Museum was that they had just won an award from the Ontario Museum Association. They won the
award-winning Brockville Museum. Okay, I should have led with that.
So they won the 2019 Ontario Museum Association Award of Excellence for Exhibitions.
What's it called?
It's the long name of it.
Okay, if I may have a recommendation from someone outside, totally removed, y'all museum people need to shorten your names and acronyms.
I know.
We love words.
Yeah, that's right.
We're like English majors.
So the exhibit that they won it for was called Travel Trunk, Unpacking Brockville's Cultural Stories. And it unpacks the role of immigration, the role that immigration has played in Brockville's development, and discover the stories of local newcomers, all while exploring your own family's journey to Brockville. So it's a really neat exhibit. It talks about, is it Homeboys, which was like a group of orphans that came over from London in the early 1900s. It talked
Home children.
Home children, yeah. Sorry.
Did you say the Homeboys?
Homeboys.
Is that where that comes from?
It talks about recent immigrants to Brockville and why they settled there, why they chose Brockville, how they ended up there. So it's a really neat way to bring the entire community aware of not just like past immigration stories, but current immigration stories and how that's affecting the Brockville community in a positive way.
Well, what's some of that stuff like? What was some of the immigration stuff that came to Brockville? Because I guess if you're looking at the St. Lawrence, that was the major trade route from the ocean and getting through. So a lot of people coming through.
I would say your early settlement of Brockville, it's the Loyalists that are coming over in the late 1700s. So you're getting a lot of Americans that are either fighting for the British during the the Revolutionary War. It's one of the wars. They're coming over, and so there are a lot of people of English and Irish background, and they are the people with money. They are the people with influence. So they are the history that's often written about in Brockville. But this is a project that started a little bit before I came on at the museum 2 years ago, but I got very involved with this project. And they started digging into, well, what are the stories that aren't being told? Because everyone in Brockville knows the Loyalist history. They know the town fathers were... I
mean, let's be honest, the white history.
Yeah, they know the white history. They know that Buell and Jones and the other very popular names in town. But when you start reading through the documents and going through newspapers, you start hearing about the Chinese immigrants who are coming in, and you start hearing about the Irish immigrants who are coming on immigrant ships and docking in Brockville. You start hearing about POW German soldiers who are being held in Brockville during the war. You start hearing about some of the Italians coming in. You start hearing about some even of the slaves that are coming over with the first settlers. And we started realizing that this story isn't being told. And we wanted to be able to tell this story to the best of our ability and also tell as much of the recent history to the best of our ability so that anyone can come into a museum, or at least our museum, and feel that we aren't excluding them, that we are trying to represent the community of Brockville to
Right.
whatever ability that we can.
For everybody.
Yes,
like
exactly.
every
Museums
single
are for
story.
everybody, so you should
Yeah.
be able to walk into a museum and somehow identify with
Right.
what you're reading and seeing.
So why, now I'm just genuinely curious about all
Yeah.
this stuff. So like, why were like the slaves and settlers, and especially like the Chinese immigrants, why were they? What was it about Brockville, right? Because you had Kingston right down the lake, not too far, which was a pretty major. That was the capital of Canada at one point.
For a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, like so. What was it about Brockville? Is it like kind of like that? I don't want to go to the city, so I'm going to stay out here.
So it depends who you're talking to
Right.
and what it's about. Some didn't have a choice. So, of course, the slaves that are coming over,
Right.
they don't have a choice where they're settling. Some of them were freed, of course, once they come to Canada, and they stay in the areas, but a lot of these people are illiterate, so they're not leaving behind historical records, so we know very little about them. For other groups that are coming in, sometimes they're coming in because of industries that are popping up in Brockville, and it's a place for a job. For some, I've read in some historical documents that they were on ships coming down the St. Lawrence, and they just wanted to get off. This was where they were going to stop.
This is where they had to pee.
Yeah.
Right? Stop the boat.
No more. So you get a lot of that. And then it was also land grants, and it was untouched area. It was somewhere where you could go, you could farm, you could be whatever you needed to be. And being a young town, a small town, we might not have a barber yet. They can set up a barber. They can set up, a Chinese laundry, a dry cleaner kind of idea. They can set up a restaurant. They can do what they want to do because it isn't an oversaturated market. And we were right on the main road between a lot of major communities, between Kingston and Ottawa and Montreal. So you saw a lot of money coming through Brockville. You got a lot of millionaires. We like to say that at one point in Brockville history, we had more millionaires per capita in Brockville than anywhere else in Canada.
Really? Eh?
So there was a lot of money coming in Brockville. So it was a good place to set up.
Right. The Rideau Canal doesn't reach there, right?
No.
I'm trying to think of my
We're
geography.
right on the shores of the St. Lawrence.
Yeah, okay. Because I'm trying to, especially that Chinese immigration part too. Like, why were they coming? And I don't even know if you know the question now. I'm like really getting in deep into history. I'm just super interested.
We'll do what we can.
Because right, like when I was thinking about the history of the Rideau Canal, and like Chinese immigration was huge, and like basically slave labor just building this canal. Like, why were they like coming through this way to places like Brockville, places like Ottawa? Was that a forced thing to come there? Or were they coming on their own free opportunity? Because that's like they would have to travel across, Asia and Europe to get to the Atlantic, right? Whereas instead of just going to Hawaii or the Pacific coast, it's kind of like backwards.
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert on immigration waves through Canada, but I do know for a very long time Canada was not very receptive to Chinese immigrants. We had things like the Chinese head tax and things like that I think it was about $500 at one point each person had to pay to get into Canada. So once they are here, that's you're looking at probably a couple thousand at least. Wow. If we were to put it in today's terms. But in Brockville, I can't say for sure, but it doesn't sound like anyone was forced to come here or to there. We're in Ottawa now, but it was somewhere where they could set up. It was somewhere between two large communities, but it is an interesting factor where it's not where often when waves of immigration come in, they want to go places where people speak the same language, where they have the same customs. And I mean, Brockville was very white. So it is interesting that we do see these different waves and different groups of immigrants coming in and settling in Brockville when you don't have a huge Hungarian population or Chinese population or what have you coming in.
Interesting. And what's like the demographics kind of like now? Like my perception of it, again, sorry, Brockville, pretty white, right? Like that.
I would still say that is the majority, but we are, I think we're one of the leaders when it comes to bringing in Syrian refugees and things like that. There have been quite a few movements to help bring people to safer countries, to safer places. And we do have a very vibrant immigrant community in Brockville still.
Shout out to Brockville. Right on. It kind of goes back to the question I asked before, but like, you're talking about reading through historical documents and articles, right? Like Dr. Google doesn't, I don't know if it goes all the way back to 1812. Like
Sometimes wish.
Yeah, like when you're looking at that type of stuff, like what are your reasons? Like, do you literally have to like have these archives of like old newspaper clippings? Are you on?
Yes,
like,
but not always.
Is there a museum database that has like it's like the Wikipedia for museum people?
Like you can go on Library and Archives Canada and you can find a lot of stuff. Like even doing my own family history, I found census records of my great grandfather was one of the home children that came over from London in 1911. He was an orphan, and I found his immigration record from when he was 10 years old and came to Canada. Like, you can find that all on Library and Archives Canada's website, which is really cool. And, like, even our collection at the museum, most of it's online. We have a great group of volunteers that works hard every day on our open drawer project, I think it's called. And a lot of our collection is searchable online. So if you know something of your family history is connected to Brockville, you can try searching on our website, and hopefully you can find something.
That's interesting. Okay, well, while I ask the next question, I'm going to go see if I can find my birth records up on here.
I don't know, like, how recent you can find stuff, but, like, I found my great-grandmother's name on the 1911 census or whatever in Canada. So it's super cool if you know, like, your grandparents' or great-grandparents' names and where they lived. You can search that.
They weren't from Brockville. It was just my
mostly
mom,
across
because she
Canada.
went to the college.
So go over to collections.
Collection. Look at this.
So there is a picture there of someone. It looks like they're kind of brushing artifacts.
Oh, wait, I got to click on. Sorry, we're just going to go through.
Okay.
Brushing artifacts.
You pass that one. So go to the button that says go to collection database. It's up a little bit in the
Oh.
text. There you go.
Ba-ba.
So type in a word.
We're searching.
Things came up.
There we go. We got
It's interesting.
some old
None of them are me.
photographs.
Anyways, we're going to take a deep dive.
We're going to have to get a
after this.
photo of you to put in the museum collection.
Yeah,
Born in
when
Brockville.
When I'm on the historical walk
we
of
were told
fame.
we need to get some pictures for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
museum's social media.
Yeah, who has? Do you guys have to run that too?
Our boss Natalie runs all our
That's
social
why
media.
it's like when three people, right? You wear so many
Many hats.
different hats and
Yeah.
things you're
We
not
all pitch
exposed
in.
to. What made like? I always love the asking the question like, what made people get into this this industry? And again, going back to the world we live in today, like, sure, people love museums and they love going as a kid, but like, what really makes people like I want to do this for a living? That like, and to tell you're both passionate about it. You can't work for a small museum and be like, I hate my job.
It makes it hard.
Yeah, that would make a very long life. Peggy, we'll start with you. Like, what made you really want to get into museums and study this? And was like working at a small museum like the goal? It's a big question.
We were talking about this earlier, actually. Getting into museums, I 100% blame my parents. Every time there was a family vacation, we went to museums. And I loved the idea of telling stories. I loved the idea of being able to see old things, being able to touch old things and things like that. Getting into the field, I always knew I wanted to be more in a smaller museum than a bigger museum because you just don't have to deal with the politics that come with federal museums. And you get to jump on to interesting projects because there's only 4 of you. So someone needs help with that. Cool, I'm going to go help you with this. I'm going to go help you with that. And I would say like the kind of defining moment that got me into museums was, I don't even know where it was. It was some sort of provincial park that had an education program. And there was these 2 people up on stage, and I was probably about 8 years old or younger. And all I can remember of this presentation is them standing up there and saying, "Death, dung, and decay. It's only nature's way." And I looked at that and went, I want to do that. And I am now here.
Interesting.
So it's been a weird career path, I guess you could say, from that to here.
And that's like college, university, like you have to go
that's
all through
going
it.
to university, going to college for museum studies. You work a bunch of contracts in the museum world trying to find somewhere.
Go and intern places.
Yeah. You do a bunch of co-ops, you do internships, you go where the work is. So I've been to a couple different provinces for work, but I finally found some stuff closer to home. So now that I'm in Brockville area.
Well, it goes back to that point of like the funding of museums, right? Like I'm sure the Brockville Museum would love to have like a team of 10 or 12 to do all these different roles, but it's very very limited.
They keep saying they want to hire me, but I'm just on a contract, so I have to wait and see.
Listen, I worked at the radio station for 4 months before they finally were like, yeah, we'll hire you.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, yeah, great.
Yeah.
No, so I get it. Sometimes doing what you love means sacrifice. And you can make all the arguments you want in the world, whether that's just or not. That's not what anything's here for. But it's like if you want to follow a dream.
Then you live in live in Ottawa and you drive to Brockville every day.
Right.
The plight of millennials everywhere.
Yeah.
And Brooke, I know from you're friends with Laura.
Yes.
You guys met in
Laura
museum,
and I met in museum
right,
studies.
And Laura's
Yeah.
On a previous episode, so shout out to Laura and go back and listen to her episode as well. But like what? Again, it's a little different. Like we're millennials. Like everyone I knew was like, I'm going to be a teacher. Everyone wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Everyone was going to take kinesiology.
Yeah.
It was like everyone was either going for teacher or kinesiology, and I'm like,
Or they watched Grey's Anatomy and they wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to radio, and everyone's like, what? Okay, that's weird. Like what? Again, museums.
So I guess I have 2 like past museum experiences that made me really wanted to get into museum studies, or museum work, I guess. So in grade 10, I'm from Kingston. So in grade 10, we took a bus trip up to the War Museum, and I saw a painting hanging in the peacekeeping kind of section of the museum. So I just brought it up on my phone because I wanted to remember what it was called and get all the information right. So it's called Painting de LIR No. 6, and it's by Gertrude Kearns, and it's of a soldier covering his face with his hands with like camouflage in the front, and it was, I believe, about the work that they did in Rwanda. And like that image stuck with me for years after visiting the War Museum for the first time. So that's like, okay, like I want to be involved in something that protects that. And then in a grade 11 school trip, we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is like the holy grail for me for museums. So if you could be like, what's the dream job that you wish you could have no matter like what? I'd be like, I want to work at the Met.
Yeah, the Met. Okay. Now that you say it that way, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Again, and like, I love museums, but I'm so out of touch with the art world. So
Yeah, same.
But do you want to go work at the art museum?
Well, the Metropolitan Museum of Art has pieces from like the pyramids in Cairo and ancient Egypt. It has medieval armor. It's got Monet paintings. Like they cover everything, and it'd be it's so cool. Like I'm such a history nerd that it would be awesome to work in a place where it's got history from like
everything,
beginning of times to today.
Right.
Yeah, so that'd be awesome.
So what's the goal? Like curator, researcher? Like where do you like to fall into?
I'm like Laura, like she mentioned when she was on the podcast. I'd love to get into collections work. So curators, you have to be like a specialist in your field with likely like a master's or a PhD. If you want to be in one of the big museums like that. In a smaller museum, the curator is kind of, in our case, like the boss. Everything they do, help decide what goes into all the exhibits. They manage finance, like they kind of wear all the hats.
You're like the general manager. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. So in collections work, you deal mainly like with the artifacts and maintaining the protection of the artifacts, and that's what I would like to do.
Yeah, that was one of like the most interesting conversations. Like all this stuff you have to do to like protect the art.
And like I love,
or just protect the artifacts and everything like that.
And like I love museums. I was like, I want to work in a museum. It'll be so cool. And then I got into museum studies, and I was like, why are there so many jobs in museums that I didn't know about? Like conservation, you don't think about how all of these items are still in the condition that they are, but it's because conservators work lots of hours to make sure that artifacts are still stable and don't degrade and stuff like that. And educational programming, like there's so many different types of educational programming that you can have in museums, from delivering a program to a group of students to how do you interpret material in an exhibit space so that it's accessible for everybody.
Right.
Like
so
there's
that's
lots
like
of different aspects.
Kind of setting up all those little like
all the different activities you can do in an exhibit.
The activities, like the little facts or something. Like, do you also like have a hand in that? Like when you're like walking by, like, did you know? Like,
yeah. So I guess that's me. So at the Brockville Museum, I'm the Interpretation and Public Program Coordinator. So long title, that basically means I do the education fun stuff. And with things like, say, the immigration exhibit, we did travel trunk. I like to call it like my baby in it, but it was a set of dialogic questions, which is kind of museum jargon for questions that make you think, that we put through the exhibit.
And another big word.
Yeah. So it's kind of like these arrows. They're all put on arrows to help guide you through the exhibit, but it poses a big question, and then it gets you to answer, but it's not a yes or no answer. It is based on your life, based on your perceptions of the world. So one of the questions we have is, what does the word immigrant mean to you? So that can mean something different to everyone. And then we might have a question about like, oh, well, where did your family come from? So there's no yes or no answer to this. This is all very personal questions, but it gets you engaging with the exhibit and thinking about how what you're reading, that even though you may not be a Syrian refugee, well, how am I connected to that?
Right.
So that's kind of one of the things I do.
And like even for the Prudence Howard exhibit, we're like, how do we make this artwork accessible into a program that people can do in the exhibit? And when you look at her artwork, you can see specific shapes. She liked to kind of start with shapes and build off of that into these beautiful landscapes and portraits and stuff. So we're trying to develop a way to incorporate that so that people of all ages can do this activity where they can use some of the systems that she used to start her paintings and see a tangible thing at the end of it.
It's always so fascinating to me that other people don't just start with stick figures like me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? I thought that's what you can do.
What do you mean you put thought into this first?
Or, you know, when you used to do like just like the random little lines and you just would start in the middle and you just build it all
I still
out.
do that when I'm talking on the phone to
like
someone.
You're just doodling, like do. Yeah, like that's me. Like that's the extent of my art still.
When Brooke and I were first working on the education component of this exhibit, it was us sitting in the basement at the museum cutting up pieces of paper in various shapes, going, okay, would this work if we did this? Well, what about if we did that? Well, how about if we did this instead? And just kind of having an arts and craft day for half a day at work. And
sometimes you just need that to think of ideas. You just have to become a kid again, use fun scissors to cut out fun shapes, and use crayons and make your own art.
Well, yeah, or you just remove yourself from your current problem or your issue, and like once you're like when you're relaxed and when you're just doing your thing, and it's much easier to help navigate out problems. Right? When you're like sitting there hyper focused, you're like, I gotta get this done, and you're like, nothing's coming, and then you get stressed, and the phone starts ringing, you throw it across the room.
Even we were trying to figure out spacing for the paintings in the exhibit because it's going on 3 different walls, and we've got 16 paintings coming. We're like, well, how are they all going to fit on the walls? So we cut out pieces of paper the size of what the painting should be, and then to figure out what order we were going to put them on the walls, we did our own abstract versions of Prudence Howard's paintings in stick figure forms to put on the wall, just so you can be like, okay, now this painting should go next to this one, and like these two would look good together.
You guys should put a picture and put that in the exhibit as well, just being like, from this.
I'm going to take them all home and frame them and be like, this is my version of a Prudence Howard.
Yeah.
This is sad, girl.
Okay, another question for both of you. What now from start to finish? Because I assume both of you didn't. If you knew Prudence, like you didn't know much at all, right? No. Right. So, what was like your biggest takeaway from her or her work or her life or her culture impact? What are you walking away with, being like, whatever it is, the biggest thing that you're taking away from this whole experience of learning about Prudence that you're just like, damn.
So because I got to read some of her letters, she was so passionate about her friends and supporting her friends and their painting and being together with them.
She was the Casey
She
Morrison
was the Casey Morrison
of painters. Shout out to Casey again. I think that's 3 in a row now.
So I have a quote here from A.Y. Jackson's autobiography. About these painting picnics and what they did. So it says, the place names there are interesting. Tin Cat, Mallory Town, Ballycanoe, and Irish Creek. We used to motor all around the district on sketching trips. The Elliots, Charlie and Ruth and their mother, Prudence Howard, and often Sarah Robertson. On the back roads, we would all find a creek or an old farm and all go to work. There would be a short break for lunch, hot soup in a thermos, and sandwiches. Then to work again. The country was flat, underlaid with rock, with outcropped frequently. It was homely stuff to paint, with ripening corn, pumpkins, sunflowers, pasture fields covered with blue bog gloss. What gay parties these sketching trips were. And it's neat because in our exhibit, we have paintings by all of those artists. A.Y. Jackson, Ruth and Charles Eliot, Prudence Howard, and Sarah Robertson. And like in these letters, you can see like, oh, Alex, who's A.Y. Jackson, came painting this past weekend. Oh, Sarah's coming up next weekend. Won't you come and paint with me, Isabel? Like, she really wanted to spend time with all of her friends and do these painting trips.
Right. That's before phones, so I'm thinking letters. Like, you have to mail that stuff out to everybody.
She wrote a letter like every other day. It's like the longest text chain because it takes like 12 hours for the letter to get to Toronto, and then Isabel responds and sends it back, and then Prudence writes again, so the next letter's like 2 days later. I'm like, this would take forever to have a conversation.
Yeah, imagine having Tinder back then or something.
Oh my God.
All those letters just go, nope.
Yeah, God, am I ghosted? I don't know. Or did the mail?
Pass the letter to the right. Pass the letter to the left.
Yeah. Oh, back on track. Jeez.
Yeah, we have a very strict program. I
can tell, right?
What is your answer?
Oh dear. I don't know if there's one thing I could say I've taken really away from this, but one of the things that will stick with me is just the family in general. The whole family has been, both past and present, have been so interesting to get to know. Prudence Howard was from a very long-standing family of, and to this day, a very strong woman who have had very interesting lives, and meeting and talking to some of them and reading some of the information of other ones has just been so interesting to see these women just kind of going, this is what I want to do, and you can get out of my way if you don't like it. And that's kind of been an inspirational thing, I think, for a lot of us to just kind of look at and see these women just doing what they want to do and finding a way to do it.
Which was even bigger.
Even bigger back then, yeah.
All right, shout out.
Her, like Prudence's grandmother, who lived in Brockville, ran her own successful dairy farm and wrote a book about it. Like, she just, I'm going to do my own thing, and she did, which is super cool.
Because I'm pretty sure there wouldn't be a lot of women.
Female dairy farmers in, like, the 1860s. Yeah. No, I don't think so.
And it wasn't even like she had to do it to support herself. She's from a wealthy family. Her husband helped design the Parliament block. She just wanted to do this thing, and she's just she wanted to milk some cows, and she becomes known as the most successful dairy woman in the Dominion, I think they say. Yeah. And everyone's asking for her help. Everyone wants to know her secrets. So yeah, she writes this letter, and I think that's kind of the farthest back we've really been tracing the family in the museum. I'm really talking about them, but it's just they've been a very interesting, very nice family to get to know.
Right, that's awesome. So this painting picnic with Prudence Howard.
Yes.
Oh, I nailed it. It starts March 31st.
Yes. So we have an opening gala on March 27th. Tickets are $80. You can get them at the Brockville Arts Center website. I'm not sure how many are left. I know there was very few left last time we checked. So if you really want to come, be the first to see them, you can check that out. But it does open to the public March 31st, and it's on until October 9th.
Right. Okay. And what's the website exactly?
BrockvilleMuseum.com. You can go there to find more information.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you go.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
If you could go, again, another two-parter for both of you. If you could go back, because I assume you're both history nerds.
Yeah.
Yes.
As am I.
Safe assumption.
Yeah.
If you could go back to any period of time to live.
Oh, goodness.
Oh.
And live out your life.
Oh, no.
What would that be?
I mean,
and while you think,
plumbing.
You know, so I'm a big World War II history guy. I wouldn't want to live during that time because that was pretty rough. Yeah. I love that history. That history to me is just I can't get enough of it. Whether it's concentration camps and those documentaries or World War II in color or
have you read
books.
The Tattooist of Auschwitz yet?
No.
Read it.
I know.
I just finished it.
I haven't read a lot of
great
books, to be honest.
I'll lend it to you.
I do a lot of podcasts. Do you have audiobook?
It probably has an audiobook.
Right. Yeah. So, yes. Yes. For me, I think I would want to live ancient Greece.
Ooh,
okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be a little bit of a cool time. Medieval was pretty dusty and dirty, and a lot of like
Medicine was fun.
the Spartans and all that type of stuff. Like it's interesting.
It's tough to say. Like there's so many cool parts of history. Like if I could be best friends with Jane Austen, sign me up. I'm down. But also like Prudence Howard living her life in Montreal in like although the 1930s were like a not great time to be in Canada because there was the depression, but like she seemed to have a fun time. If I could be on her level in the 1930s, I'd be okay.
See, that's not a fair question to ask someone who works in museums.
Yeah.
I would say I got two answers. One would be kind of looking at the early modern era, so kind of the 1500s, 1600s, because that's just a time of huge social change and craziness happening in Europe at the time. And I've always been fascinated by things like the Reformation and how Shakespeare's work are impacting everyday lives and the new inventions and everything coming out at that point in time. But I also love the 1920s and 1930s. Also benefit of almost modern medicine and indoor plumbing and electricity and things like that.
No, the Reformation, I mean, like, very cool time, but that definitely would have been a little dicey.
But yeah, you know, being a woman, I'm 30 now, I'd have, maybe 5 more years and then I'd be dead.
Yeah, but like the Enlightenment, like, when I think back, like, to sit down with, like, Socrates and just be like,
oh, yeah.
Bro, like, what's going on up there?
Yeah, there's always that list of people that's like, if I could go have a drink with you.
Right?
Yeah,
what would
exactly.
that be like?
Right?
Exactly.
Like, what is going through your mind? Because you can't contextualize, you have those people in history that are like the thinkers, and you can't contextualize till later to who that is now.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can kind of with like more sciencey stuff like physics and chemistry, like the quantum people who think about the universe, you can kind of get that way, but like the philosophical, the political writers,
I love those like historical fiction TV shows where like someone goes back in time and like meets their Mary Curie or something like that, and you're like, she wasn't like that. She couldn't have been that cool. Yeah. And then maybe she was. You don't know.
You don't know, right? It's interesting. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you for letting us.
Shout out to Prudence for being alive and doing all those things and getting this exhibit inspiration.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's great. Great work. I may have to make a trip down to Brockville.
I think so.
Yeah, and claim my
your spot.
My spot on
put a little picture on a case.
Yeah, on my Brockville Hall of Fame. Again, March 31st it opens.
Yep.
Brockville.com. Do you have social media?
Brockvillemuseum.com. Yep. Yeah. I think it's at Brockville Museum on Twitter. Probably the same on Instagram. I'm going on my phone right now to check.
As we stall.
As we slowly speak.
We definitely are as Brockville Museum on Facebook. That's where we post a lot of our stuff.
So it's at Brockville Muse, M-U-S, on Twitter.
Okay, cool.
And we were posting lots of like behind the scene photos of getting the exhibit ready. On our Instagram, we post a lot of stuff on how to conserve your stuff at home and what we do in conservation and within the museum. So go check it out.
Yeah. So if not for anything else, like, save your mom's, your first
we do have
macaroni
actually,
picture.
With our collections manager, we have a program coming up called Caring for Your Family Treasures Workshop, which will happen on April 1st, May 6th, and June 3rd. And it'll be about how to preserve your family heirlooms of different types, so books and papers, photos, and textiles. So that'll be an interesting thing for people, I think, to go to.
Yeah, I got to get my macaroni picture from kindergarten.
Definitely,
that preserved. Absolutely.
That's a family heirloom.
Okay, make sure you go check this out. Peggy, Brooke, thank you for coming in.
Thanks,
Thank
Ryan.
you so much.
Bye, everybody.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.